Welcome back to the debate. We're the place where we dive into the, let's say, complex and often controversial ideas from Neoncore Media's The Deep Dive. We give them our own scrutiny, offering different perspectives, and aiming for some really in-depth discussion.
Absolutely. And just to be clear, especially for anyone new, all our debates, everything we talk about, it springs directly from the content produced in the deep dive. We're here to unpack their episodes, their ideas.
Exactly. So today we're looking at a huge cultural event that the Deep Dive analyzed in their episode E30, the Drake-Kendrick Cultural Earthquake, how a rap beef reshaped memory, power, and public perception.
Right. That episode really laid out how the Drake-Kendrick-Lamar rap beef wasn't just music, it was, as they put it, a cultural earthquake. Massive implications.
No doubt about the impact, but where we differ, and this is our core debate today, is this. Was the defining aspect of this whole thing primarily about, the strategic manipulation of brand and power? Or was it more about the unprecedented, really rapid and deep reshaping of collective memory and public perception?
A key distinction.
And my position is firmly on the side of strategy. I believe this conflict was predominantly a calculated struggle for dominance. For legacy, it was a deliberate reordering of the hip-hop hierarchy through, very intentional brand maneuvers.
And I see it differently. Strategy was definitely there, I won't deny that. But I argue its most profound impact, the real earthquake, was the irrefusable emotional coding. How the public, viscerally internalized these events, shaping subconscious perceptions. And the instantaneous shift in how people perceived and remembered these artists. That felt like a true psychological rupture, often spinning way beyond the artist's control.
Okay, let me lay out my case for strategy. I really see this as a meticulously executed chess match right from the start. Think about Kendrick's Control verse, August 2013, calling out everyone. That wasn't just random aggression. It was a calculated brand provocation, a shot heard around the world, like the episode said, designed specifically to disrupt the hierarchy, set the tone for the next decade.
And Drake's immediate reaction? Dismissive. Kendrick wasn't murdering me at all. That's classic defense, right? Strategically minimizing the threat to his brand. This kicked off what became essentially a decade-long Cold War, 2013 to 2022. Sublime and all snick disses, Drake's the language, Kendrick's lines in King Kunta about ghostwriters, clearly hinting at Drake. This wasn't just tension simmering, it was a deliberate strategy. Keep their names linked, shape the narrative, build anticipation, all while maintaining this competitive coding between their brands without a full-on clash.
So you see the quiet period as purely strategic waiting?
Largely, yes. Then boom, Kendrick's like that. March 2024, declaring himself outside the big three. That was a deliberate strategic strike, an immediate defiant statement asserting his singular claim. And it, in one move, just vaporized Drake's brand of untouchability. It reshaped market perception almost overnight. Drake hitting back with AI voices of Tupac and Snoop, that's next-level brand gamesmanship. A direct cultural co-optation, weaponizing West Coast legends against Kendrick. Even trying to tie Kendrick's response time to Taylor Swift's album release, that's a transparent strategy to try and diminish Kendrick's seriousness.
Okay.
And finally, Kendrick's pop-out concert, June 2024. Masterclass in brand reset, a victory lap, a coronation on Juneteenth, performing Not Like Us 5 times, with LA gang members on stage. Taking that group photo, that solidified him as West Coast King through a powerful strategic unity statement. Then the GNX album, the massive tour, these were pivots, redefining his brand beyond the beef. And the success? #1 debut, all songs charting, highest grossing hip-hop tour ever. That confirms a power shift. It's right there on the charts. Strategy executed, power consolidated.
That's definitely a strong case for this strategic angle. But I still find it hard to accept it was primarily calculation. For me, this felt like a genuine cultural upheaval, a complete psychological rupture, a kind of shared nightmare, honestly, that dug deep into collective memory and perception, often in ways the artist couldn't control. That psychological tension, that low-level hum the episode mentioned, it was there even in their early days, 2011, 2012, when they seemed like brothers. It colored everything. And The fans weren't just watching. They were like collective detectives, piecing it all together, building the narrative themselves, even when the artists denied it. Think about King Kunta or The Heart Part 4. People were analyzing those way before the big blow-up. The whispers just got louder, you know? It kept their names linked in the public mind, maybe more powerfully than any planned strategy. And Kendrick's verse on Father Time in 2022, that showed his own lingering emotional investment. It suggests something deeper, more personal than just a cold chess match.
Okay, personal investment, sure, but driving the overall event?
A look at J. Cole. His rapid public apology after dropping 7-Minute Drill, that wasn't just a strategic retreat, I don't think. It showed the immense cultural weight, the sheer intensity of that moment. It signaled this wasn't just rap anymore. It was about legacy, public standing. The pressure was overwhelming. And think about Drake seeding accusations early on, like the liking young girls reference. That feels like psychological warfare, planting doubt, shaping perception long before the main diss tracks. Kendrick's euphoria then becomes this cultural assassination, tapping into that collective memory, weaponizing every rumor, every perceived flaw, creating this absolute tidal wave online.
Right, Euphoria was brutal.
Brutal, exactly. And then May 3rd, 2024, Family Matters and Meet the Grahams dropping almost simultaneously. The accusations flying, domestic abuse, paternity secrets, and then the really dark stuff, sexual predation, trafficking. That was raw psychological warfare, using the most intimate details for maximum damage. That creates deep emotional coding. It leaves an indelible mark, like a permanent software install in the public's view of these people. Not Like Us became an anthem, right? It fostered this shared us versus them feeling, tapping into existing anxieties, forcing sides. That I minor line, it became a meme, a chant, instantly. It shows how fast a psychological wound, a provocative line, gets baked into pop culture. Drake's Heart Part 6 on May 5th, it felt like such an uphill battle because honestly, the collective memory had already set. The emotional coding was done. You can't easily rewrite that once perception shifts so dramatically. Ultimately, I think it shows how fragile celebrity is now, how fast influence shifts, often beyond anyone's control. The collective consciousness just decides which story sticks.
Okay, I see the power of that emotional coding, absolutely. But let's revisit that decade of subliminals. You call it organic psychological pressure, but I still maintain it was primarily a strategic chess match, a calculated delay. Yes, it built anticipation, fueled fan engagement, but crucially, it kept both artists culturally relevant by association. Drake downplaying control wasn't just an emotional reaction. It was a tactic. Manage the narrative, control his brand's perception against a direct challenge. That Cold War was a strategic choice to prolong the tension and raise the stakes for an eventual confrontation.
I struggle with framing it as primarily strategic. That low-level hum, the silent countdown, that feels like organic pressure from two alpha artists aiming for the absolute peak. The fan decoding wasn't just reacting to strategy. It was the collective subconscious processing real emotional tension, regardless of specific artist intent at every moment. The public was emotionally invested long before the gloves came off, actively co-creating the narrative. And Kendrick's Father Time verse really drives home that personal, emotional weight for the artists themselves. It felt like genuine, deeply felt tension resonating outwards, not just, managed brand conflict.
An interesting point about the collective subconscious co-creating it. I'll grant you that. But let's look at Like That again. You emphasize the wave it created, but I see it as a precise strategic strike. Its explicit goal: break Drake's Big Three brand concept, elevate Kendrick's singular claim. It was a deliberate psychological rupture, yes, but aimed squarely at reshaping market perception. And J. Cole's apology, I don't see it as purely emotional buckling. I see it as recognizing a calculated power move by Kendrick and making a strategic retreat from an unwinnable brand battle. He saw the strategic landscape shift instantly and chose to protect his own standing.
I'm sorry, I just can't frame Cole's move as merely a strategic retreat. Yes, Like That was powerful strategically, but the sheer speed and ferocity of the public reaction to Cole's response 7-Minute Drill,
It showed this raw, almost uncontrolled emotional energy that had built up. It wasn't just about market perception. It was a visceral public reaction to someone challenging the perceived hierarchy in that moment. That collective feeling made it impossible, even for a giant like Cole, to stand his ground. The emotional coding of Kendrick's challenge was too immediate, too intense. Public sentiment wasn't just observing a brand battle. It was actively participating in an emotional event.
Okay, let's pivot to the most intense part. Those personal accusations, May 3rd and 4th. Domestic abuse, paternity, trafficking allegations. You call it raw psychological warfare, and it was extreme, yes. But I argue it still served a strategic purpose. Maximum damage to the opponent's brand and legacy. Attack the core of their public identity. The goal was strategic disruption of reputation, making recovery commercially and culturally impossible. Drake's Heart Part 6, however weak it seemed, was an attempt to manage that reputational crisis, control the damage to his public persona, even fighting uphill against that solidifying negative perception.
And I come at that from a different way entirely. The speed, the intimacy of those attacks, it went beyond just brand damage strategy. It felt designed to create deep emotional coding, imprinting these new, damning perceptions directly onto the public consciousness. An indelible mark, a permanent software install like the Deep Dive episode put it, meaning how Drake was seen fundamentally changed, like new default settings. That emotional impact, especially amplified by Not Like Us and the viral A minor line, it generated a shared feeling that became culturally inescapable. It fundamentally reshaped how Drake was felt by the public, not just how his brand was viewed. That emotional rupture was immediate, lasting, and I think transcended a purely strategic calculation.
All right, looking post-beef then. Kendrick's pop-out concert, the GNX album, that record-breaking tour, to me, these are textbook strategic moves. Capitalize on the win, consolidate power, pivot the brand for the long haul. The numbers, #1 debut, all songs charting, biggest tour, they prove a deliberate power shift, secured through masterful brand management and narrative control. And Drake's album afterwards, Some Sexy Songs for You and Give Me a Hug, that reads like a strategic pivot too. Crisis management, shift focus, maybe try to devalue Kendrick's aggressive tactics for his own core fans, attempt to regain some narrative control.
It's a plausible read on the strategy, but I think the cultural reset goes wider. The way the beef got tangled up unexpectedly with things like that Zul Corning come in Anthem Boo protest at the Super Bowl, or even Antonio Brown's legal stuff being linked in public discourse, that highlights how public memory gets warped, right? It shows narrative control is incredibly fragile, even for these huge stars. And Kendrick's Grammys for Not Like Us, Song of the Year, Record of the Year, the entire audience chanting the A minor line, that demonstrates a deep shared emotional resonance. It solidified his narrative in historical memory in a way that feels bigger than just commercial success or calculated moves. It feels like the collective consciousness chose, somewhat beyond any single person's control.
So wrapping this up, we've definitely looked at this from two distinct angles. The strategic manipulation of brand and power versus the deep reshaping of collective memory and perception. I still hold that from control right through the post-beef strategy, this was fundamentally a calculated reordering. The brand maneuvers, the strategic positioning, that was the engine driving it, ensuring the power shift wasn't just felt emotionally, but solidified through tangible commercial and cultural tactics. A campaign for dominance.
And I maintain that while strategy was undeniably a part of the toolkit, the defining characteristic was the ripple effect, the shifts in collective consciousness, the emotional coding, the way memory itself was altered, that permanent software install, the shared feeling that took hold, the narrative threads spinning out of control. That speaks to an unprecedented psychological rupture. It cemented legacies in ways that felt almost emergent, perhaps unforeseen, and certainly not fully controllable by the players involved.
Well, we certainly agree on the sheer magnitude of this cultural earthquake as the deep dive laid it out, and debating whether it was primarily calculated brand warfare or a deeper psychological upheaval really does shed light on the complexities of modern fame, influence, and culture.
Yeah, it highlights that clash, doesn't it, between strategic intent
and the often unpredictable, uncontrollable wave of collective consciousness, emotional response, and public memory. How legacies get built, torn down, and ultimately cemented.
It certainly underscores how narratives are fought over, how influence ebbs and flows, and what ultimately sticks in the cultural landscape.
Absolutely. And there's definitely much more to unpack there, especially around how collective memory gets coded, updated, often without us fully grasping the depth of the impact. Lots to think about.